Black, and also to Greg Hutnik for presenting. Kate Black is the Coastal Resources Specialist with the New York State Department of State Office of Planning, Development, and Community Infrastructure, and she will be speaking today about DOS grant funding opportunities and tips on successful grant applications and management. And after her presentation, we'll have some time for questions, and then we'll shift over to Greg Hutnik, who is a senior planner and GIS analyst with Cayuga County Planning and Economic Development, who will speak on project development, grant writing, grant administration, and how the county assists municipalities on clean water projects and grant management in general as well. And then after Greg speaks, we'll also have some a Q&A time for him as well. And really just more broadly, since there is a small group of people today, I guess I'll toss it to Kate and Greg. Since there is a small group, are you okay if we just pause during your presentation and just field questions that way, rather than having like a set aside time for questions?
Yeah, I was going to actually say, if anybody had any questions throughout my presentation, just stop me.
Yeah, that works.
Perfect. All right, we will do that.
And I talk really fast generally too, so if you also need to stop me and tell me to slow down, I can try.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'll monitor the chat as well, just in case. But feel free to use the raise hand feature, or there is a small group of us, so just kind of come off mute and just say, excuse me, and ask your question very kindly. And Kate and Greg, I'm sure will field that. So without any more hesitancy, I'll pass it off to Kate. And I think Liz Thomas she's managing the Zoom. So hopefully you have your ability to share the screen and we'll get started.
Yes, I think so. See if it works. Do you see my slideshow or do you just see my screen? Oh, here we go.
I think it's the screen.
So now you see my presentation, like in presenter mode?
Not in presenter mode.
Maybe I need to. I don't use Zoom very often, so okay, maybe.
That looks. We can see it. It's but
it's like that version that shows your notes. So it is like a presentation, but with the notes. Yeah.
Let me try this.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. All right.
Third time's a charm. Thank you.
All right. So this is like Erin said, I'll give you a brief overview of the Department of State program, some kind of like tips and tricks on the RFA, and any other suggestions I have. The CFA normally comes out in the beginning of May. We never really have an exact date. The fact that there's no state budget yet could push it from beginning of May to mid-May. So I don't really know when it is. Up until the release of the CFA, I can, answer questions very more specifically, like, oh, I have this project idea. Do you think it's a good one? Once the CFA is released, I really can't do that at all. There is a mechanism to ask questions, but it's through like a kind of generic Department of State email, and then the answer would be posted. I think there's 2 of them, maybe one in June and one in July normally, where you can go and it's posted, but you won't get the same type of level of specificity that you would get beforehand. And that goes like every year, so the CFA closes in July this year and you already start thinking about your project for next year. You can reach out to me anytime the CFA is not open for questions you may have. All right. Maybe did my slide move? Are you seeing the second slide?
yes.
Okay. So this is just like a very brief overview of our program. So New York State approach to managing waterfront areas recognizes that while the state government can promote development and provide protection for natural resources, municipalities are actually in the best position to determine their own waterfront objectives and to adapt the statewide approaches to specific local needs. So Department of State, pursuant of the State Waterfront Revitalization and Coastal Resources Act, encourages waterfront communities to prepare LWRPs or local waterfront revitalization programs. The program offers local governments the opportunity to participate in the state's coastal management program, and local communities are able to refine the state coastal policies and program. There are some communities within the Cayuga Lake watershed that have participated in our program. So recently, the Village of Union Springs completed an LWRP that was approved by the Secretary of State. And our program provides matching grants on a competitive basis to villages, towns, and cities or counties acting on behalf of one or more villages, towns, and cities located on along the coast or along designated inland waterways. So it's weird where it fits in, but watershed planning is actually considered a component of an LWRP. So that is how the watershed plan kind of fits into our framework. So, you know, the Cayuga Lake watershed has participated with Department of State and watershed planning. And as a result, you're eligible for implementation funding through us. I'm assuming everybody here is pretty familiar with watershed planning, but in case there's anybody new, you know, a watershed is the area that drains into the watershed, the area of land that drains into your specific water body. Every body of water has a watershed, and understanding that relationship between the water resources and the watershed is vital for protecting water quality. So the water quality may be affected by various issues from individual actions, land uses, regional activities, short and long-term weather and climate related changes. And while our grant program is kind of designed for individual municipalities to apply, we do recognize that a lot of issues are best addressed on a watershed scale. So we try to work with watershed communities to get implementation funding in a way that works with them. So you have a plan. So the next step of a plan is to start implementing the plan. So you are, like I said, eligible for implementation funds because you have completed that process. Implementation projects must be identified in the planning document. And this isn't to say like every single project you identify in your plan, we can only fund those things, but say, you know, you did a planning document and then subsequently you identified invasive species and runoff, and you know, certain things are a priority, and then maybe subsequent information gathering have led you to a specific project. That's fine, but you know, like say you didn't identify invasive species at all. Invasive species aren't an issue in your watershed as identified in your watershed plan. Then if you want to come in and do an invasive species project, that's a harder connection to make. We have to be able to make that connection from the planning document to the implementation project you would like to do. So the types of projects Department of State can fund is really quite broad. We're lucky in that we can fund planning, design, feasibility, implementation. The one major restriction we have is that all projects have to be on publicly accessible, publicly owned, or where a permanent public easement is in place. So we can't do a riparian buffer on a private property, but because of right-of-ways, we could help do a road ditch project along, you know, village-owned roads. So like I said, a Department of State project can vary greatly. You know, I think sometimes it's hard to see the full scope of work because you're kind of thinking about a specific problem or an issue. But so here's just some examples to kind of spur some imagination or spur some ideas. Green infrastructure, we've done planning and design and implementation of different green infrastructure practices, from rain gardens, stormwater wetlands, water quality assessments to better determine where green infrastructure would have the biggest impact. We've worked with communities to develop road salt reduction programs, invasive species management. So we do not fund straight herbicide application, but we've done like boat wash stations, manual Eurasian milfoil removal by divers. We can and have done local law development. So say your watershed wants to develop a steep slope law, and that, you know, that model law is then kind of presented to each municipality as an option for them to adopt. So we've helped them with that. We've done floodplain reconnection projects, breaking, you know, levees and installing culverts and things like that. Like I said, stormwater wetland creation. We have worked and developed public access points, as that is a priority in some watersheds to increase public access and use of the water body. We've funded and supported public education materials for classrooms, and then also just outreach materials in general. And then we can also fund data collection and research. So here's just a few examples. So, you know, like I said, each watershed has their own priorities, but here are just some examples. Erie County is the top left. Project partners characterize stream corridors using a visual assessment protocol. Canandaigua's stormwater wetland to mitigate extreme weather events. This is an All-Stable River stewardship brochure that they use for public outreach. This is a boat wash station. Up here is a the floodplain restoration and reconnection project. And then here's some Eurasian water milfoil harvesting. So how to apply. So our program is funded through, or is funneled through the CFA. So the consolidated funding application, like I said, that usually is released sometime in May. Closes usually end of July. We don't get much heads up and maybe a day or two before it's publicly released. So I do not know, but as I said, this year's the lack of a budget may push it back a little bit. Once that is live, there's usually a recorded webinar available, and then there is usually a live webinar. And like I said, if there are questions submitted during that time, usually once or twice a period, they will collect, answer them all, and post them on the website. The RFA, or the request for applications that we release, is quite detailed. And it's long. And I'll say most of the time, the major things do not change, but every year, priorities may shift. How we're scoring may shift. The rubric may shift a little bit. Even the order of questions may change, and we can always tell if a community is going off of last year's RFA or previous year's RFA, because the answers are in the wrong spot, or they're calling something like a section different than what it's called now. So I really want to encourage you to read that RFA every single year. And like I said, the webinars and some Q&As are posted on the Department of State website. So this is one thing we get a lot of questions on this, especially from smaller municipalities that just lack capacity. Lack capacity from bodies as well as financial capacity. So I'll just kind of provide some examples of what we've seen other communities do and things that are allowable. So back to the RFA, this is outlined very specifically every year in the RFA. Most of the time, this stuff doesn't change, but particularly with the local match, you want to make sure that you're looking at exactly each year's RFA, what is allowable. So Department of State is a matching grant. So we have 25% match. And most of the time, if you're in a disadvantaged community, you can apply for 15%, only 15%. And that information is on the RFA. There's like a link that you can see if you qualify. We recognize that applying for and managing grants is quite cumbersome to communities without a lot of capacity. Not everybody or most people don't have, you know, a planner or somebody dedicated to managing grant funding. So here are a few examples. So while our grants have to be held by, you know, a municipality or a county, you are encouraged to, if you would like to have partners, and in many cases, those partners can help manage the grant. So we've had nonprofits, soil and water conservation districts willing to do payment requests, help manage the reporting requirements of a grant, and they can be even included as, I'll say, like a consultant in your budget, and they can be reimbursed for those costs. County planners, I know Greg's here, they provide a lot of really great services, so they may be able to assist. So obviously staff, if you have staff time spent on a grant, we also do allow for their time and costs to be reflected in the grant. So sometimes communities are able to hire somebody part-time potentially to help manage, or, you know, dedicate some existing staff time to these, and that their time can be used as match or be reimbursed. And then finally, a lot of private contractors and consultants these days are willing to provide grant management services as part of their contracts, which is also allowable. So for the match, this isn't the case for every state agency, but we do provide a few different ways to meet your match requirements. You know, obviously cash match is the most straightforward way to meet your match requirements. It tends to be the easiest when you're submitting payment requests, but not everybody has that kind of cash on hand. So we do allow various ways. So like I said earlier, staff time can be used as match. So, you know, if your village clerk is going to be developing payment requests, then keep track of that time. You know, we can put that in, that can count towards your match. We typically, in almost all of our contracts, have some sort of advisory committee made up of a represented group of people, you know, based on the project type. And as long as they're not elected officials, their time can be used as match. That's $15 an hour. Excuse me. Equipment usage, a lot of times for implementation projects, you know, maybe your local DPW is able to assist not only with their staff time count, but also the equipment usage. Maybe they're using their backhoe, or they're using other equipment, GPS, something to help the project that can be used. Finally, donate professional services is a complicated match option. Excuse me. I don't know if I would suggest it if you have other options, but it is an option that is available. So if you have somebody willing to donate the professional expertise to the project, so, you know, think of like an engineer willing to review final plans on a project, or even help develop final plans. This time can be documented at $60 an hour towards your local match. So the reason this gets tricky is because you need to kind of justify their inclusion as a donated professional service versus volunteer hours. So this person, if they're attending the advisory committee meeting as a member, that wouldn't count towards their donated professional services, because their expertise isn't being necessarily used in at that meeting. So it's a little tricky. Our the fiscal office tends to be quite strict and stringent with this option, but it is an option that we can take advantage of if we need to.
I have a question. Did you
Sure.
say the volunteer rate is $15 an hour?
It is, yeah.
So I, in past, have always used the independent sector, which every year puts out the national volunteer rate. And that's like much higher than $15 an hour. I was just curious, where does the state get $15 an hour from?
I honestly have no idea where that number comes from. I think, from year to year it can change. So I don't know where they pull that number from, but that is, I think it's going to be next year's rate.
Okay.
But I don't actually know. I can find out. I can ask see where I mean I think fiscal sets it, but I don't know where our fiscal office gets it.
All right, just curious because like FEMA and other federal agencies use the higher rate.
What is the rate that FEMA
I
uses?
put it in the chat. It's from the independent sector, and sometimes if it's higher, depending on where the location is, like from my understanding in Florida, sometimes their rate is higher, but this is like a rate that I used for like public assistance grants to
Okay.
offset like debris management costs and stuff. We
Mm.
used like this going rate.
Okay, I'll find out. I'll ask where it comes from.
I'm wondering too, how do you calculate the equipment usage amount?
So there's like there's like we can provide you like a link to like just like a rate. So it's like a backhoe is $50 an hour. I'm making these numbers up, but like it's very specific of like the type of equipment and what you can charge.
So it doesn't matter if it's our 1989 dump truck or a 2020 dump truck.
Nope, it's just a dump truck.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
And sometimes, depending on how it all plays out, sometimes that can end up being a lot of money depending on the capacity of the community. Canandaigua has really taken advantage of their the DPWs around the water within the watershed, and they ended up sometimes $200,000 in equipment usage that they able to use for match because they've been able to do a large percentage of the work themselves and not have to hire contractors. So it can total up to quite a bit of money depending on the project and if they're capable.
Hey, what about something like stream monitoring and sampling, or even like that kind of thing, like where you're getting somebody to do, the stream monitoring? I feel like that's kind of a source of match on some of these 9-element projects.
Yeah, so it would have to be something that is like related to the project. So like if you were doing like I don't know, a salt storage shed, not that we would fund that because it's not really a waterfront related project, but existing in water body monitoring, I don't, because it wouldn't go back. You wouldn't say like, oh, we need this to amend this salt storage shed because of an in-lake water body sample result, so it has to be kind of related. If you're like, say, like you're doing a riparian buffer project and you're doing some data collection because you need to better understand the flow rate to develop your engineering report, then yes, that can be used.
Okay.
I also read that like it's the New York State DOT equipment rate schedule that's used for equipment costs. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And is it the schedule from 2017 or is there an updated one?
I don't know if there's an updated one. We what do they have? Is that the most recent one posted on our website?
That's what I could find on like a quick Google.
Yeah, I mean, we would normally use whatever this is what's the most recently available one. I don't have access to one you don't have. I don't have a special one.
Okay. Yeah, I know sometimes it's like FEMA had specific ones and they released one like very quietly in 2022 and like people were they were still using the 2019 rates and it was kind of like a mess, but
oh yeah. Yeah, we've had we ran into some issues with the FEMA stuff because we've worked on some of the READY projects up on Long Lake Ontario, and there is discrepancies with FEMA versus DOT versus that whole thing. So we have had issues with that, but yeah, it would just be the DOT schedule.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
There's one in the chat here. Before, during, and post monitoring allowed / encouraged?
Yeah, so if you are doing a restoration project, we would definitely encourage monitoring, with the caveat being our grants are 5 years. So, you know, we can't require you to do anything outside of your grant. But if, you know, say year 1 and year 2, you're able to implement your project and you want to do monitoring for 3 years, like, yes, we would be very supportive of that. And very likely, if we think there's, you know, a possibility of you being able to fit it in, we would require it. And if not, we'd probably require some sort of monitoring plan at least be developed. You know, if it's beyond 5 years, we can't really enforce it because there's no there's no money tied to it. There's no contractual requirement because the grant would be closed, but we would definitely want that.
I feel like this is a question that sometimes comes up, like say it was green infrastructure
Mhm.
and there's like, you know, post installation maintenance. Is the maintenance required if it's within that grant timeline period? Or is that generally like an ineligible cost?
I mean, if I guess it would depend, you know, like I don't know if we would. It would depend. I think it could be, you know, I think a lot of times the maintenance isn't in some green infrastructure projects isn't, you know, gonna need to happen within the first year, but you know, general maintenance like mowing and stuff can happen. You know, but we would have to you know, kind of take it. If you include it in your application, you know, I don't see why we couldn't if that's something you want to do. A lot of times communities, what we've seen is that they want to finish the project and kind of be able to close out the grant. So we want to make sure that
Mhm.
whatever the scope of work that you've identified, you know, we don't want to expect more from a community than they are able to do. So, you know, you come in for a green infrastructure project and you have an identified maintenance costs in your first, you know, in the 1 year post completion. I'm not going to make you do it because you didn't put it in your budget. But you know, if you know, you do a project and you want to reevaluate in a year and you know, deal with invasives or, you know, whatever, I think that could totally be fundable and reimbursable.
Thanks.
Mhm. All right. So this is I'll say the 2 things that I think are really important when you're developing your application. Not that it's all not really important, but understanding the scope of work and then an appropriate budget is really important. So, you know, while we recognize some projects may be really early in development, so you may not know, you know, your full scope of work, but whatever you know, we really want to see because we want to make sure that the project you've identified, you fully understand what needs to be done, and as a result, have a budget that's realistic. So we want to make sure, you know, when we fund a project, we want to make sure it can be finished. You know, like you say, you want to get to Z. We don't want you to stop at S because you ran out of money. You know, obviously there are extenuating circumstances, inflation, things you can't account for, but you know, we really want to make sure that when we're looking at a project, we know that you know the work that has to be done. And that's one of the reasons why we don't fund planning, design, and construction in a single grant anymore, because there's no way, right, at the planning phase how much construction is going to cost because you haven't done design yet. You know, you don't know how much you know, the stormwater requirements are going to be. You don't know how much gravel you're going to need because you're just starting the process. And similarly, Department of State posts some sample work plans alongside the RFA. So, you know, while these work plans may not be like a perfect fit for the project you're thinking. Especially with water quality related projects. Usually we have to do some pretty customized work plans for these types of projects, but you'll get a general understanding of some of the generic tasks that we always require. So like we always require public or a project initiation meeting. We always require public outreach. You know, if you're doing construction, design and construction project, we're going to want to see schematics, you know, like, you know, we're going to want to see a public meeting, you know, there's going to be some generic tasks that we always require. And those are good to include, you know, like if that shows us that, you know, that all the different requirements we're going to have. And, you know, if that generic doesn't fit and you need to make your own tasks, that's fine. You don't have to like squeeze your project into some of these generic work plans, but I think it's really good to reference them for the things that may overlap. We also want to see the realistic timeline, and we don't care if it takes 5 years, right? So, you know, telling me you can get it done in 6 months doesn't help you score better. But we want to make sure that it can be done in 5 years. So, you know, if you're talking this huge project that's going to take years and years and years, we may not fund that, or we may fund a phase. You know, let's start with phase 1, let's end with and then do a phase 2, because we want to make sure we want our grants to close within 5 years, if at all possible. There is always the opportunity to apply for an extension, but we try not to do that, and they are hard to get. So we want you to be realistic. So if you can get it done in a year, great. If you can get it done in 5 years, great. You know, there's no, you don't score better or worse based on how long it's going to take. The score really has to do with like, does this seem realistic? You can't do, you know, a 9-element plan in 6 months. So if you told me you were going to do it in 6 months, I'd be like, nah, that's not possible. So things like that. And similarly, a budget. We want to make sure that the scope of work you've identified in the budget fit, you know, like if I know, you know, if you want to do a major restoration project, and we all know how expensive restoration projects are, and, you know, say a stream restoration project, they're wildly expensive. And you tell me you're going to get it done for $20,000, you better have some really good justification of how in the world you're going to possibly get that done for such a small amount of money. Now, if you can justify that budget, like we've talked to XYZ, we know this is the work we need to do, then great, that's fine. But we just want to make sure that the budget reflects the scope of work and you've kind of done your homework. Any questions on this?
No, and I don't see anything in the chat either. So.
Okay.
Well, I was going to ask, I forget, is there a minimum amount you can ask for? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the minimum?
I think it's like $50,000.
Okay.
Yeah, that started, we were having we were having some issues with planning. You know, we all would love planning to be really affordable, but, you know, consultants have been charging more, things are getting more expensive. And so we were running into the issue of people asking for such a small amount of money that we knew that they couldn't complete the project they wanted to do. So that's kind of where that comes from. So this slide is just a couple screenshots from last year's RFA, and this is the program criteria. So I really can't emphasize enough how important this section is when you're reviewing the RFA. This pretty much tells you exactly how we're going to score the application. So for background information, how Department of State reviews applications is that 2 staff members at Department of State review the applications. One is typically quite familiar with the project type or the community. So, you know, I might not know a community really well, but I tend to manage most of the water quality projects. So maybe I'd be assigned to a water quality project, whereas somebody else may be not familiar with the community and not familiar with water quality, may also be the second reviewer. And that's to create a, you know, a sense of fairness across the line. You know, if I, you know, I'm a restoration ecologist by trade. So, you know, they want to make sure that I don't score all of the water quality projects really high, because that's what I love. So it's to create a sense of fairness, but in that you want to make sure your application is really, you're writing it to the person that may not be familiar. So, you know, stating that the creation of a stormwater wetland will improve water quality, it's true. And I know all the ways that it will improve water quality, but you really should be spelling it out. So you want to say, you know, by having water flow through a stormwater wetland, you're giving it the opportunity to slow the flow of water. Suspended sediment is able to settle out. Vegetation is able to filter out pollutants, and then water leaves the wetland cleaner. And it while also providing additional habitat. You know, you want to say it all. Don't leave anything out. So we have to, because we have to review what's seen. You know, I've reviewed projects in the past where I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, disappointed, because like I know you could have, like I know the applicant could have said X, Y, and Z, and you know, I know that it's doing those things, but I can't score you on that. I have to score you on what was written. And you know, you'll see that there's all these bullet points. Go through, you know, when you're working on your application, like, okay, have I demonstrated an effective structure to advance the completion of the project? Have I said that? Okay, I have, you know, like almost make it as a checklist. And, you know, that's not to say that each project is going to be able to hit every check or every bullet point. You know, that would be crazy. You know, there's really no such thing as a perfect project. We fund so many different types of projects that our scoring rubric is really designed to, you know, allow everybody to do well. But that also kind of makes it impossible to like score an 80 or a 100. But as many bullet points as you can do, get them in. And if you feel like you're being repetitive, that's okay. You know, the more information, the better. It makes it easier for us to score, and it makes it easier for people who may not be as familiar with your program or your water body or the project type to score the project fairly.
I have a question. So, and I apologize if I missed this, but just from the heading on this slide you have here, all of this funding is coming through a local waterfront revitalization program?
Yep.
Is
So
that- is that the only path?
For Department of State, so we have under Department of State, there's, you know, we have the LWRP program, then we have the the Brownfield program, and we have DRI and Smart Growth. So those are the four main funding streams. The watershed plan was drafted under the LWRP program. So that's typically where people, you know, tend to stay, but that doesn't preclude you from applying to DC or Ag and Mark, you know, like you're welcome to use this plan to your advantage in any funding source you would like.
At first you said a stream bank project, and I was like, oh, I do have a stream bank project that could use some funding. But the project is in the town of Caroline, and I guess I don't know why they would have an LWRP.
Well, they don't necessarily, if they're within the watershed, they don't need to have an LWRP because they would be covered under the watershed management plan.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a complicated relationship because LWRP is like community specific, and a watershed plan is obviously for an entire watershed. But the way like our law works, the statute for our program, since a watershed plan isn't adapting the policies, there's a set of policies that have to be adopted at the local level for an LWRP. Since doesn't require local law adoption, it can't be considered like an LWRP. It has to be considered a component. But as long as you've completed planning with Department of State as either an LWRP or an LWRP component, you are eligible for implementation funding. One of the things we do want to see though, when a community is coming in for implementation funding through a watershed management plan, is that they were involved in some capacity in the watershed planning process, right? We don't want a community who refused to participate and was really, you know, not involved at all to then be like, oh, well, I'm eligible for all this funding now, so I'm going to come in and take advantage. You know, we want people to be involved.
Well, this one
in the
would
planning.
come come through the city of Ithaca's drinking water source protection plan. But it's up in the watershed, it's not in the city of Ithaca. And they add, so I think the state does recognize those plans, right? They recognize
The source water
CWIO,
protection
yeah.
plans. So yes, we do. That plan doesn't make them eligible for Department of State funding. So for Department of State funding, it has to be a plan that was developed through Department of State.
Like
If
like
the watershed plan.
Yeah, okay.
So maybe in the source water protection plan, you identify a specific stream, but in your watershed management plan, you also talk about, stream bank stabilization. Then that's fine. Then that project would be eligible for implementation funding. Yeah.
And just for clarity, because in the chat, someone asked the same question. The restoration and protection plan, that's what you're talking about, the Cayuga Lake Watershed Restoration Protection Plan.
Yeah, and
Okay.
like the subsequent, we just wrapped up well, I guess it's not just anymore, but we wrapped up the last grant through Department of State too, where we did the
update. Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Yep.
So it has to either be the original plan or any subsequent plans that we funded building off of that plan.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That's
Because
great.
maybe someone is a watershed management plan, and in that watershed management plan, they've identified that they would like to do a more thorough stormwater inventory, to identify better green infrastructure locations. So then we fund that planning document where it's looking at green infrastructure practices. So projects identified in that green infrastructure project would be eligible, but we need to kind of be able to follow the trail.
Sure, great. Thank you very much. It's
Yeah.
helpful.
So then is there a benefit all right, since there's a restoration and protection plan for Cayuga Lake, and that's a watershed plan, what would incentivize, let's just use Caroline for an example, them to create a local waterfront revitalization plan? Is there any additional incentive to create one of those, since there's one for the whole watershed?
So it depends. There is advantages. Normally you get extra points on our applications if you have an approved LWRP. Because that's like our program. We do incentivize people who have done our program. Aside from the strictly points for applying, there is some benefits. It's a much more like of a deep dive into your individual municipality. And it's not just all water quality related. So you can talk about streetscaping, you can talk about, and potentially get funding for, signage, maybe you want to do like welcome signage, and maybe you want to do build out and establish new parks and public access and things like that. Revitalization strategies, economic revitalization strategies, those are all kind of part of an LWRP, whereas a watershed plan is obviously more focused on like the water quality part of it. So, and that being said, though, there is a requirement for a local law adoption. The Secretary of State, New York State Secretary of State approves those. They're a lot. I mean, watershed planning is a lot, but for smaller municipalities, it's a lot to do an LWRP. So it really depends on, the types of projects they would like to do. And I think it'd probably benefit to hear the perspective of, like Union Springs. I think that they had a pretty successful, I wasn't involved in their LWRP, but I think they've had a really successful experience. So they might be worth asking if they would recommend it to other communities.
Can I just follow up with that? Well, I'm just picking on Caroline just because it's just popped into my head, but I mean, and maybe because it was mentioned, but I mean, I doubt that people in Caroline would consider themselves a waterfront community, but they're part of the watershed, so they could do one as well.
I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know where Caroline is.
Yeah, I think because it doesn't touch the lake, it doesn't touch the inland waterway, it's not eligible for an LWRP.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if they don't touch it, yeah. So there's there's a list on the Department of State website you can access, and it's just if you just Google New York State designated inland waterways, it would come up with a list, and it lists all the water bodies. And it's not just lakes, you know, it's rivers, streams, but it's typically bodies of water of like significance. So, you know, the unnamed tributary is not going to be on that list, but the Hudson River is on that list. You know, Genesee River is on that list. Obviously, Cayuga Lake is on that list. So you just have to be along one of those
So
designated.
6 Mile Creek isn't on that list?
It's a long list, but probably not.
Okay.
But you'd be surprised, you know, if you have a body of water that you do think is of significance that isn't on that list, it's in the legislature, so you can like petition your local representative to like petition to have it added. So there are new ones added all the time, but you kind of have to make your case of why it's you know, body of water of significance.
And then I'm hogging the time here, but okay, so the RPP is a watershed plan for Cayuga Lake. And you had said that you had to see that, you know, the municipality that was applying to the DOS was actively involved in the creation of that plan. But with Cayuga Lake, I mean, with the watershed, there are 57 municipalities. So there's no way that all of the municipalities are going to have been actively involved, because it would have been just too many people, you know. So so can that be argued to that they were in support of?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, in support of is adequate. And I think also, you know, we accept like letters of support as well. So, you know, if the IO wrote a letter on behalf of, you know, they've, you know, been an active supporter of the watershed planning effort and improving water quality, I think that is also helpful, that, you know, they do have the support of active participants in the watershed planning and implementation across the watershed.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mhm.
Other questions? Maybe not.
Well, if you have any more questions, I'll put my email in the chat, although I know a few of you do have my email. And, you know, feel free to ask me questions before the opening of the CFA. And if, you know, after the CFA is closed, feel free also to reach back out. Like I said, my hands get a little tied during, just because we can't give the appearance that we are, you know, providing assistance to an applicant during the grant process, but before and after, I can.
Great, thank
And
you.
if you wanted to like run by an idea, like, I mean, I can even, you know, provide feedback on that. Like, listen, this is the project I'm thinking about. You know, Ian Smith has done that. He's like this, you know, brought up a map, showed me what the project was, asked me if I thought it would be a good project, asked me if I had any suggestions. So, you know, while I can't say I can talk for like 4 hours on, you know, 50 different project ideas, but if you're thinking, you know, you got 1 or 2 and you're thinking like, which one may have a better shot or something like that, you can let me know.
Thank you so much, Kate. I might
Yeah.
pick your brain at some point soon.
Yeah, I'm meeting with Ian next week.
Okay, I think I know what it's about. Well, yeah. That's great. And yeah, that's awesome. It's so great to have that assistance. I think oftentimes it's not known that like you're able to provide that level of assistance and really go through some ideas and talk through it. And it's really, it's immeasurable, like that level of assistance and technical expertise you can provide. So thank you.
Yeah. And selfishly, you know, like the communities I work in, I want to see implementation projects happen. You know, I want to see you all succeed. So selfishly, I like that too.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, if there are questions that anyone else thinks of, certainly either drop it in the chat or just chime in when it comes to your mind. That is a small group here, so we'll just continue on to have a small conversation. And with that, I'll pass it over to Greg. Thank you so much again, Greg, for presenting and putting another local lens onto this.
Right. And while I share my screen, I'll say that was a great lead in by Kate, talking about the local waterfront revitalization program. I realized I was thinking during your presentation, Kate, that I could probably just have a whole presentation applicable to this, request here from CWIO, specifically about the village of Cayuga's local waterfront revitalization program, which I just completed last year, and it's in the state's hands right now to be reviewed.
Oh,
And
exciting.
And so we're now going through the process of taking, projects here and figuring out how can we move them forward. So I'm actually not talking about that specifically in depth, but please do ask, at the end of the presentation, if you want me to specifically touch on those, because Aaron and I have been working with them. So let me share my screen here. Oh, let's see. Okay. Now I'm wondering, let's see, can you see presenter view or?
Yep, looks good.
Oh, okay, so you can see the presentation.
Mhm.
Okay, great. And not my secret notes on the side. Okay.
No secret notes.
Okay. Let's see. Let me close this down. Great. So thanks again for having me. My name is Greg Hutnik. I'm a senior planner and GIS analyst for Cayuga County Department of Planning and Economic Development. Today, I'll be speaking about project development at the local level, applying and administering grants, and how the Cayuga County Planning Department can assist municipalities at every stage of project development and implementation. This presentation is really geared, I think, towards municipalities in Cayuga County, but it could also be very informative to other municipalities in general in the watershed, especially those without planning staff. So today I'll go over project development, pre-grant award, applying for the grant, post-grant, assistance from our department, and some examples of projects. And again, I'm thinking more about the Village of Cayuga LWRP. So I don't highlight that too in depth here, but please ask me more questions about that at the end or during the presentation, which is fine. So in general, and I realize that this presentation we could talk all about pre-grant award. We could spend the whole time talking about applying for the grants and then grant administration. They could each be their own 3 presentations, but I tried to sort of crunch it all down that breaking it down into, before applying for a grant and in the project development stage, or even before that too, a community should have in place generally these 4 things, and I'll go over each of them in the following slides. So plans and codes. Having up-to-date versions of the comprehensive plan, zoning regulations, or other local laws as applicable helps to lay the foundation for future capital improvements. All funders want to see a direct link to at least the comprehensive plan, and that what you're asking for is what the community wants and needs. Topic area and specific plans are helpful too, such as streetscapes, water and sewer infrastructure, parks and trails, other capital improvements and water quality. They show that the community is forward-thinking and planning ahead. Any other plans, policies that you can point to at the local, county, regional, and state level are a bonus. A large portion of any grant application is a written justification for the thing that you are seeking funding for and why it's important to the local community, county, and region. Staffing and shared services, having these in place, the community should answer these questions for each service, amenity, and program provided. Do we have enough staff? Do we have the right staff? Are we not providing services that we should because we don't have the right staff for it? And then ask, can we share this cost with another municipality, village, town, or county, to provide staff and services? Is there a local not-for-profit or volunteer group that can help? Ensuring that you can meet current and future staffing needs for the services, amenities, programs, and projects that you want to provide and take on is a crucial step to determining whether the municipality is ready and has the capacity needed to move forward with implementing their plans. Maintaining regular communication with a wide variety of stakeholders, policymakers, and funders is a key element of getting things done. And I think Kate spoke about this too, of just that you can reach out to her for the program. And I think this highlights this here in this slide. Elected officials should regularly meet and communicate with other local boards, neighboring municipalities, county legislators and departments, regional partners and boards, state agencies, and their representatives and staff. Keep in mind that if people don't know what your issues, concerns, goals, and needs are, they cannot help. You may miss out on an opportunity simply because you're not in the know, or if you aren't part of the conversation, you'll likely miss out. There is a time commitment involved with regular communication, but it will help inform decisions for the betterment of the whole community. Divide and conquer if you can. The mayor or supervisor of the town or village doesn't have to be at every daytime meeting with every partner all the time. Lean on other board members and staff you trust to help carry the load. And no question is a silly or waste of time. All elected officials and staff should feel free to reach out to any partner, agency, or group to find the answers and information needed to make the best decisions for your community. Having a comprehensive plan to guide the community is great, but implementing it is even better. Plans that aren't acted on just don't help the community. Elected officials and the planning board and staff should look at these plans and use the goals, recommendations, actions, et cetera, to put into writing an implementation strategy. This is usually a part of a comprehensive plan, but sometimes it's not. So it doesn't need to be complicated or lengthy. And as I said, most comp plans already identify recommendations or actions as short to long term or low to high priority items. So start with the short term high priority items and select where to start. And really be asking yourself as you go through this strategy, what is the easiest thing to achieve right now that will have a positive impact on the community? What should we do second, third, et cetera? Is this something that can be done this year or next, in 5 years, because more planning or engineering is needed? Having a basic plan of what you want to work on in the order you want to do them in, communities to-do list, helps to be prepared for future funding opportunities and long-term budgeting and staffing. It also shows the community members that there's a collective plan to get things done. Bonus effort is if the implementation strategy can have cost estimates and funding sources identified with it. So on to, again, we could talk lots and lots about that, but kind of going into just applying for a grant, really making the link to the funding source. So planning ahead, knowing when grants will generally be available will give your community the leg up to start organizing everything needed to apply. Knowing in advance what projects have been awarded grants by different funding sources will help strategize which projects would be competitive for which grants. Cost estimates and project budget. Before applying for the grant, you should know how much the project is going to cost so the municipality can know how much local matching funds need to be contributed to the project. Practically, the actual cost of the project is subject to change when it comes time to putting together a scope of work for the project, especially when hiring subconsultants. However, the municipality should make as sincere effort as possible to get enough quotes from reputable firms to be able to make a sound judgment when estimating costs. There have been situations when a project cost is so grossly underestimated that the grant award was not enough to cover the costs and a municipality had to secure a bond to cover the remaining balance. This is not the norm, but it can happen, and it's happened in our county. This is why getting cost estimates well in advance, such as at the implementation planning stage, is crucial. A side note and caveat to that is that even when getting cost estimates early on in the process, it is prudent to update those when it comes time to apply for the grant. As we all know, costs of materials and services can fluctuate year to year, so having the most up-to-date costs is imperative. Resolution from an elected body of officials is usually needed to authorize submittal of the application, grant application. So plan submittal of the grant application with regular town or village board meetings in mind. The resolution should show the project cost and the requested local match. Ideally, the elected body is aware of this request well before it becomes formalized in a resolution. Letters of support and community involvement really tell the story of the need for the grant. These communicate to funders that there is a unified effort and need for a particular project. Depending on the grant, letters could come from local, county, and state elected officials, nonprofit organizations, and community groups. Do the homework on the grant and find out which types of support would go a long way. Some rely more on letters from elected officials. Others look for examples of community support to justify the funding. Recently, we were told by a grant rep for the State Parks Agency that one of our unsuccessful applications last year for funding didn't get the points it needed, in part because we relied too heavily on elected officials to submit letters of support, where state parks really wanted to see more community engagement, community meetings, surveys, informational sessions, to really just show that the community and not just its elected officials want the project. So again, all that whole slide, I mean, really could have just been a whole presentation of itself, and I'd be happy to talk more about it. But moving on to kind of post-grant award, project administration and facilitation, hiring subconsultants may be necessary for large projects and should be known before the grant is applied. A community will need to solicit firms through a request for proposals process, or if the work scope is known, a request for qualifications. There may be diversity hiring requirements too, such as soliciting and contracting with women or minority-owned businesses. So be sure to check all the sub-consultant requirements of the grant agency before. Ensuring that the project is on schedule and within budget is the main task for the grant awardee. Planning to complete the project well in advance of the grant's expiration will allow time to close everything out, such as getting invoices from subconsultants, getting authorization from the elected body to pay those invoices, and any other grant closeout reporting that needs to happen. Meeting goals of the project seems like a no-brainer, but in projects that take years to complete, it's possible for some aspects of the work to get sidetracked. It's important to continually update the grant administrator about work progress and reference the grant contract. You may even need to reference the grant application to be sure that the work is going according to the original vision of the application. Grant administrators who may not be as familiar with your project as you are often reference the original application to understand the intent of the grant award. This is especially the case if there is a change in the grant administrators, which I can also talk about. I realized I should have had a slide about sort of challenges and obstacles, and this is one of them that's recently come up for a project I'm on. Keeping up with grant reporting requirements is an easy task, but one that often falls by the wayside, especially for smaller communities. Agencies will typically require status reports quarterly or another frequency to ensure the project is going as planned. If you fail to submit reports on time, this just might not reflect well in the next time you apply for funding. And we've also heard this from an agency recently.
Hey, Greg, I have a question.
Please.
Back on the other slide about like hiring subcontractors or contractors to carry out work. Is there like any best practices you can share about how to advertise for that, like using like web places, posting boards, or newspaper advertisements or whatnot?
Good question. So we here at Cayuga County, we are required to at least post an RFP or an RFQ through a system that we have at the county. But we often just have sort of a running list of firms that we've worked for in the past that we will often just blast them out to. So there might be other methods that other staff here have done, but those are the two that one is the required one at the county level to be posting it I'm blanking at the moment what Cayuga County requires, but it's through our purchasing department. And then the other is really just sort of firms that we've worked with before.
And are municipalities able to kind of like leverage that posting? Like, would you be able to post on the behalf or help with that? Sometimes in some grants in the past, I'm familiar where that's been like a tripping point about being able to follow procurement standards and posting things appropriately rather than just not following procurement standards and just hiring firms that, you know, have a long-standing relationship with someone in the community.
So your question is, can municipalities, at least here in Cayuga County, sort of use our posting methods, this required notice that we give as part of their project?
Yeah, or are there ways that the county assists with making sure that procurement standards are being followed?
For our project, for the projects that we're working with a municipality on, yes. If it's a project that a municipality is just working on themselves, and they just ask for help to get the word out, we can help with that, but they don't. I might need to get back to you on that. I don't think that they would need to follow our county procurement policy.
Yeah, there's usually a procurement policy at the municipality level, and like Department of State grants.
Right.
You have anytime you execute a contract, we ask you to also sign a procurement policy stating that you followed your procurement policy. So, we don't dictate, like Department of State doesn't dictate how you go out to bid or anything like that, but you are expected to sign, you know, essentially an affidavit saying like, we followed our rules, we did what we were supposed to do. And as a side thing to that, you know, at Department of State, we also have MWBE goals. And when I say goals, they're really a requirement. I don't know why they call it a goal. It's not a goal. You have to do it or go through a lengthy waiver process. So that's also important to make sure that you're advertising and following all of the good faith effort things to get women and minority owned businesses to participate in your grant.
I
Okay,
can-
thanks.
And I'll just add in from Tompkins County, we have like 3 different policy levels. So under 10,000, you need like 1 or 2 proposals. 10 to 50,000, it's also 2 proposals, and then over 50,000, you have to do an RFP or RFQ. And like Greg said, ours, it's like this really, I don't even understand the process. It goes through bid reporter or something like that, where
Yes.
it like, I just have to do some pieces. I send it to purchasing. If people have questions, I don't even talk to them. And then there's like the bid opening that they have as like a Zoom meeting. It's all very formal. So I don't know that you could do that for a smaller municipality, but I mean, a lot of them do have their own procurement policy, or yeah, as Kate's pointing out, like probably the getting a couple of proposals, or I think even if you release it in a newspaper or something like that, meets the requirement. If you put out the RFP in the whatever they call it, the newspaper of record or something like that.
Yeah, thanks for adding that in. You know, I think bottom line, it's worth the municipality if they are just working on a project and they want to hire a sub-consultant. They could still reach out to us. I mean, we're, as I said in one of my previous slides, just reach out with questions. We'd be happy to help out, even if we're not, you know, working on the project directly. We provide support to all the municipalities, so we want to help them get their projects done. All right, I'll move on. A little bit of assistance from Cayuga County Planning and Economic Development. Really, we work at every stage of project development and implementation. I like to think of our department as a Swiss Army knife. We've got lots of tools. Even if we don't have the right tool, we are always connecting people to the right tool. So we assist at every stage, as I said, from identifying needs with the community through planning efforts, to applying for funding, to managing the grant and project to completion. Sometimes we're involved at every single stage with a community. Other times we're only involved at one of the stages. It's completely up to the community. I have examples I could talk about if you're curious about being involved at every stage of this, and then the community either keeps us on or goes their own way. So I'd be happy to kind of dive more into that. But I will go on to more examples of projects. So County Planning Department provides support, as I said, for the county's 23 towns and 9 villages, and you know, highlighting some of the larger project priority areas of municipal land use planning, community development, waterfront revitalization, parks and recreation, economic development support, ag and farmland protection, and water quality and resource protection. So I'm going to, just for the purpose of this presentation here, and really just showing how projects go from the planning stage into development, I'm really going to just touch on these top 4. I know you might be looking at that bottom one as water quality and resource protection, and that's what CWIO might be all about here. You know, I chatted with our environmental planner here, Michelle Wunderlich, who's on your technical advisory committee. You know, a lot of this is done at the county level, the water quality and resource protection efforts. You know, we don't have too many examples at the local level, you know, where this is the case, although with the village of Cayuga currently right now, that I could talk more about, you know, we might be doing a shoreline restoration project with them and helping them develop that project out. So I don't highlight that project specifically in the presentation coming up, but we could talk more about it. So a strong and consistent focus of our department is providing land use and community planning services to our towns and villages. The map shows a range of land use work currently underway. We're working on multiple zoning ordinances and multiple comprehensive plans. Some of these are completely new for communities and some are updates. In all cases, the work we're doing is a result of our towns and villages knowing the work that we do and reaching out for assistance. As we'll see in upcoming slides, the land use and community development work often results in local residents identifying community improvement and redevelopment projects that follow completion of these plans or similar planning work. And then we work with local elected officials from there and community residents to target and secure funding to make the projects come to life. So kind of tying into with Kate's presentation, so an example of this sort of following up from comprehensive plans to the next stage are working with the shoreline communities in the county on local waterfront revitalization programs. The most recent work has been funded by the Department of State LWRP grant program and involved the village of Cayuga on the northeast shore of Cayuga Lake and a joint waterfront program for the town of Sterling and village of Fairhaven on Lake Ontario. Final draft programs for both of those areas created with the active participation of community residents and businesses were submitted to the state for review in late 2022 and are expected to be approved into 2024. Union Springs LWRP was the result of a 2016 grant award and was adopted in 2021. These LWRPs, along with local comprehensive plans, set the stage for projects important to the community and their residents. And then we follow up with these plans and programs to work with communities to secure funding that they need. So going from there, a good example of that results in community improvements from the Union Springs LWRP is the 2022 New York State grant award to for the construction of an ADA compliant kayak launch at Frontenac Park in the village of Union Springs. This project was included in the Union Springs LWRP, as I said, and in the Cayuga Lake Blueway Trail Plan, a waterway trail running along Cayuga Lake shoreline from Ithaca through Cayuga County and over to Seneca County, a plan that was spearheaded by the planning departments in those counties. Another planning project that will lead to construction of shared community facilities is the Sterling Fairhaven Community Connection Trail Feasibility Study. Awarded funding from the 2022 New York State CFA round, this trail will connect West Barrier Bar Park in Lake Ontario to Main Street in Fairhaven and onto Fairhaven Beach State Park in the Lake Ontario shoreline. This was spearheaded by a determined group of community residents and supporters, and this trail was included in the Sterling Fairhaven Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. Another example of a project identified by a community and assisted by our planning department is the Erie Canal Rewatering and Trail Connections Project, a project that was funded by New York State with equal shares of local matching funds from the town of Brutus and Cayuga County. Connecting the village of Port Byron and the town of Brutus, just west of village of Weedsport, this planning project advances the design and engineering for trail improvements along the Erie Canal towpath trail, including plans to open and rewater the canal to support paddling in the former canal. It also acts as a water or a flooding mitigation device. There was a lot of flooding in years past in this area, and so this improved canal will help to mitigate some of that. This phase of the project will be complete by the end of this year, and plans are underway to identify capital funding needed to construct these improvements. This is one of my projects here. And then the last example, not really related to water quality, but just another example of how our department has helped local communities was through the New York Forward program. Planning staff here prepared a number of applications for community redevelopment in 2022 and resulted in an award to the Village of Moravia last month. Staff worked with the Village of Moravia to prepare a New York Forward application, building off the Village Comprehensive Plan, which we also recently completed for the village. The $2.25 million grant from New York State will leverage private investment in the village, supporting renovation of buildings along the village's Main Street and improvement of key parks and public spaces. In all, we assisted 4 villages with 2022 applications, and we will be working closely with these and other villages for the 2023 round. That concludes my presentation. I do, as I said, I can talk more about any of that. I did also just briefly before the presentation sort of put resources, just from some of the main grants that we use at the end of the presentation. So I'd be happy to talk about this if anybody has any questions.
Oh.
Hi, Donnie. Hey, I forgot that woman's supposed to come to get that pizza, so I'm gonna have to get the milk in Genoa.
Oh, that's
I think that wasn't a question for us. But I do have a question because you do a lot of work there. How do you prioritize which projects you'll do each year? Do like municipalities reach out to you, or do you reach out to them, or how do you decide which ones to take up?
You know, this was a question that I had during my interview before I worked here, because I was curious about that. Is it county driven? Is it municipality driven? You know, because the county doesn't have, we don't have any, there's no county authority over land use decisions. They're really municipality driven. Now, I'll say it's a little bit of both, but I would say majority is municipality driven. We here might, you know, be a little bit more in the know because we have more staff. You know, the municipalities here don't have planning staff. You know, it's a town supervisor or a mayor, deputy, clerk. You know, there's just not a lot of staff. So we are able to kind of be that for them. And when we hear about funding opportunities, we might say, oh, that would actually really help this comprehensive plan was just updated last year and it included this project. We think that would be great for this funding. And so we might reach out to the municipality and say, hey, you know, here's this funding source just because we identified this project with you last year. So that's how it goes generally. It's usually municipality driven.
And so do you have a regular communication with the municipalities in your, like, do you have an email list or something like that you reach out to municipalities to let them know that you have these services, or how do you let municipalities know?
Good question. You know, we do, so we do trainings. We offer 3 trainings per year to planning boards. So we have different topics, and often those are the times that we just remind folks, you know, we have a group of 50 people in the room of all over the county, planning board members, chairs, and we just say, we're here, we're able to help. We do have email blasts that go out if there's, especially for those trainings, and then maybe some particular funding is coming. It's a little informal. We don't have any sort of formal process, but you know, what happens too, what I found, I've been in the department just for a little over 3 years. I found that sort of municipalities sort of like buddy up with planners here. So you work with a municipality and then they really want to keep working with you. So I've got a few sort of under my wing now that they just are constantly, you know, reaching out to me for questions or assistance, and same with other staff. So we kind of leave it, you know, there are communities that are just quieter than others, and so we don't, you know, we don't sort of check in and say, hey, how is everything going? It's really we try to lean on more of a municipality-led process.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and you know, just to follow up on the Village of Cayuga project that we're working on with them. So, because I didn't include it in the, you know, go into too much detail because we're really starting to develop it. But Village of Cayuga went through comprehensive plan process back in 2013. They updated their zoning code, and then they got grant funding for an LWRP, and they were the awardee for that grant. And then they hired our department, or contracted with our department to help them prepare the LWRP. And I actually, so it's not on the Department of State's website, but I do have a project website. And I know that Erin's probably familiar with this because she was sleuthing through the draft document, but there's just a little project website for it. You can visit the document there, but there were a number of natural resource projects in there related to water quality or green infrastructure. And so one of them the village is interested in, and that's a shoreline restoration project. The Village of Cayuga owns over half a mile of Cayuga Lake shoreline, which is so unique for a municipality on Cayuga Lake, I think. We just, you know, with a 90% private property ownership on the lake, this is a really unique situation. It's a very small village. but to have a half mile is significant. And there's just been a lot of eroding over the years, and there's opportunity there. And so I've been working with Aaron, and we've met out at the site, and just trying to put together, or I'm trying to put together some cost estimates for the village, and we can see really how much this might cost, you know, given this loose vision of what the shoreline could be. And then maybe we'll see if this year is if we're ready to be submitting an application this year to help them out. But that's, again, it's totally up to the village. We're not going to submit this, you know, without them.
Do you have some of your own personnel costs or, you know, time covered by some of these grants that you submit?
That's another, yes. So I had that in the slide originally, but I left that out thinking it might be a good question. So there's no hard line between what we ask for a fee for, or we have a fee for, but we do charge 50% of our hourly rate on bigger projects to municipalities. So it's a county resolution. This is really at the discretion of the director of the department. So, you know, advice, suggestions, even minor reports, even some grant applications we'll just do for free. That's part of just our work. When we're getting involved, like in a like for the LWRP project for Village of Cayuga, we are charging for that.
But then do you, on the, like, if you're submitting a grant application with the smaller municipality, do you, I mean, is some of your time covered under that grant?
Yes. So yeah, so that would be part of the local match.
Okay, got it.
And actually, I'm correcting. I realize, so that 50% number I quoted actually would not be for grant projects. Excuse me. So that's just for non-grant project. Grant projects will just will provide our full our full fee, our full hourly fee, and that's because that does help out their local match. You know, if you have to put in 25% of a project cost, you know, submit it to the state, you'd rather see the full amount from us rather than half that amount. So yeah, I want to clarify that. All right. Well, thank you. I have on that, I can share that presentation with Aaron, and then it has my contact information. You know, so, you know, we're happy to help out with our municipalities.
Thank you so much, Greg, for the breakdown. And thank you so much, Kate, also. And yeah, if you're able to share the presentation, I think that'll be very helpful. And I saw, Liz, you're recording this, so that should also be provided to CWIO members. That's all that I had planned for the speaking. I guess one last call if there's any additional questions. Also, I'll say if there are questions that anyone has that might be more specific, as Kate mentioned, there's only a limited amount of time that she has that she could provide some sort of specific comments or questions. She dropped her email in the chat, so please do reach out if you have questions. And then if there are other questions, you can also email them to myself, and I can follow up with Kate or with Greg. I did see Michelle Henry asked in the chat, what is the expected timeline between RFP award funding in hand and grant finalization?
So normally CFA is released in May, closes in July. Applications are scored, you know, goes through a whole process. Our applications are scored 80 points through Department of State, and then the local REDCs get 20 points. So then those get combined, scores get ranked. Usually awards are announced December. And then, you know, in January, early February, at Department of State, project manager that's been assigned to your project would reach out, start working on a work plan and a budget and cleaning that up based on what, you know, what was applied for, and, you know, getting it all packaged up. Then it goes through an approval process. And it usually honestly takes until at least the next summer to get an executed contract if you're lucky. It takes a while. Part of it is because of the fiscal year, you know, that there's almost like a blackout period in the spring that nothing happens while the budget is figured out and everything. That being said, there is the option to, you know, if you're working on a project, you can kind of start at your own risk. I'll say that, you know, we can backdate a contract through, you know, the beginning of the fiscal year, the year that the CFA is released. So CFA is released this year. You can kind of start work and get reimbursement for work starting at that point. That is at your own risk. Not encouraging anybody to do that, but you know, say you're doing a certain project regardless of state funding, you know, you got to start. This is something that's got to happen. You're hoping to get state funding for, so you start it and then you get the award. Fantastic. We can kind of backdate to capture some of that work if need be. But again, you know, things happen. When COVID happened, people had backdated and started working, and those all the awards were still eventually, you know, executed, but it took a really long time that first year. So you'd be kind of holding onto those expenses for, you know, quite a while. Not that, knock on wood, that's something that won't happen again, but you know.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. Any last questions? Okay. It's 4:30, half an hour back of everyone's time. Sun is shining here in Geneva. Hopefully it's shining where you are at. So thank you everybody so much. And I'll pass it to Liz Thomas if there's any other things besides next week, 6 o'clock at Martha Van Rensselaer building, conference room 2250, 6 to 8 p.m. is we have the room, but the meeting should only go until about 7:30. That's Wednesday, the 26th. And Cornell Masters in Public Administration students will be presenting on some of their assessment and reviewing of local laws within the watershed. Yeah, Greg, those were fantastic maps. I was like, wow, this is great for like next week's presentation of like where they're zoning and comprehensive plans and things like that. That's kind of what some of the students were looking at. So those were great maps. I will be looking at them when you share your presentation. All right, Liz, is there anything else?
No, I think we're all set. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And I think we can put this on the web. This will be because our website's kind of new. We haven't really put any videos up, but I think we're going to try so that, because I think this is really good information for municipalities to have. And I know elected officials are really busy. It's hard to get their attention. So we'll make this available for them at other times as well. All right. Any last parting words for anybody? Not. Great. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.